al-Moallem meets his Russian, Iranian, Cuban counterparts and the St. Vincent and the Grenadines Prime Minister. Lavrov says that Russia will continue supporting Syria to overcome the crisis. And the Syrian Arab Armed Forces continue their qualitative operations against terrorists. Good afternoon, this is News in English from the Syrian Arab Television in Damascus. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov held the countries that reject the implementation of Geneva Agreement on Syria responsible for pushing Syria even deeper into internal strife and continuous militarization of the crisis, as they only call on the Syrian government to stop violence and encourage the opposition to continue the acts of violence.
Speaking yesterday at the 67th session of the UN General Assembly, Lavrov said, the international community should unify efforts to coerce all sides of the Syrian crisis to end violence immediately, launch dialogue and reach a middle ground solution for the reforms that satisfy all spectrums of the Syrian people.
Russia resolutely condemns all kinds of violence, from wherever source it comes from, and is convinced that there is still an opportunity to undertake collective actions.
Lavrov added that extremist organizations including al-Qaeda have become more active in Syria and carried out terrorist acts against the inhabitants and the public infrastructure. He underscored that practical steps to overcome the crisis needs to begin through halting violence, releasing of prisoners and hostages, and supplying of additional humanitarian aid, as this will create conditions to start an inter-Syrian dialogue. He expressed Russia's support to the efforts of the UN envoy to Syria al-Khudra al-Ibrahimi, asserted that his country will exert all efforts to make his mission a success.
Vice Prime Minister Foreign and Expatriates Minister Walid al-Moallem, who is heading the Syrian delegation of the 67th session of the United Nations General Assembly in New York, resumed official meetings at the UN headquarters in New York. More about that in the following report.
Moallem met the Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov and discussed with him bilateral relations and means of bolstering them. He gave a review of the latest developments in Syria and discussed details related to the terrorist acts which target public and private institutions, which take place due to the policies of some countries in hosting, funding and training armed terrorist groups. He also briefed his Russian counterpart on the latest developments pertaining to Bahraini mission and Syria's efforts to make his mission a success in a way that preserved the independent Syrian mission, and highlighted the attempts of some countries to thwart the mission. For his part, the Russian Foreign Minister stressed his country's support for Syria. The two sides agreed to continue coordination and cooperation through diplomatic channels. Mr. al-Moallem also held talks with the Iranian Foreign Minister Ali Akbar Salehi and discussed with him the latest developments regarding bilateral relations and mutual cooperation in light of the distinguished relations. The two sides also discussed means of developing cooperation and consultations in all fields and exchanged views of the mission of the UN envoy al-Khudra al-Ibrahimi and means of backing his mission as to ensure non-interference in the Syrian affairs and launching a Syrian-led political process according to the agreed-upon national principles. Al-Moallem hailed the good offices of Iran to help the Syrian people overcome the current crisis. The foreign minister also met with Cuban Foreign Minister Bruno Rodriguez Parella and discussed with him the historic relations between the two countries. Talks launched on the situation in Syria, with al-Moallem briefing Rodriguez Parella on the latest developments in terms of diplomatic efforts to help Syria overcome the current circumstances, particularly the efforts of the UN envoy to Syria al-Khudra al-Ibrahimi and Syria's work to ensure the success of his mission. For his part, Rodriguez Parella affirmed his country's continuing support for Syria's independence, promising to work with all friendly countries at international circles to help Syria and its people, while al-Moallem thanked his Cuban counterpart for his country's efforts. The two sides agreed to maintain bilateral consultation and coordination. Al-Moallem also met St. Vincent and the Grenadines Prime Minister Ralph E. Gonsalves, who stressed his country's support for stability in Syria, noting that his country abstained from backing the anti-Syrian decisions at the UN General Assembly. Gonsalves expressed his heartfelt wishes to the Syrian people and leadership. Al-Moallem thanked the foreign minister for his country's stances and agreed to keep up mutual consultations and cooperation.
The Israeli occupation authorities deliberately started a fire in al-Khudra area, which is located near al-Masna area southeast of Majdal in occupied Syrian Golan and west of the liberated village of Sahita. Sources in the occupied Syrian Golan said that the fire spread to farmlands containing apple orchards belonging to Syrian farmers, noting that occupation forces did not deal with the fire, nor did they extinguish it in order to damage the farmers' crops and to have it spread towards liberated lands. A terrorist group set fire in the woods near the villages of Al-Sarkisiyya, Khirbat Sulas, Beit Halabiyah and Al-Zahra in Latakia countryside, and while firefighters were trying to put out the flames, the terrorists stole 2 fire trucks. Terrorists also fired mortar and RPG rounds at houses in Khirbat Sulas, causing material damage to houses and properties. And in a related context, in Barza area in Damascus, a number of terrorists killed in Al-Baladiyya Square. Also yesterday, an armed forces unit targeted a group of terrorists who were on board a truck, eliminating them. The truck contained material for using explosive devices and mortar rounds, in addition to stolen and smuggled sedatives and medical equipment. In Aleppo, a unit from the Syrian Arab Armed Forces targeted terrorists at Souq al-Khudra, Athena Hall and Jamal Mosque in Kalaseh neighborhood, killing and wounding tens of them. Authorities also killed and wounded scores of terrorists near Al-Bous factory in Bab al-Nayrab and Al-Istiqlal school in Bustan al-Qasr and near Bab al-Hadid roundabout in Aleppo. Another unit of the armed forces clashed with an armed terrorist group in Tel Zarazir. The clash resulted in the death of 22 terrorists and the injury of others, in addition to destroying 2 Dushka-equipped cars. Syrian Arab Army units clashed with an armed terrorist group that tried to infiltrate into Syria, coming from Lebanon at Kalaseh in Homs, inflicting heavy losses upon them. A source in the governorate said that the armed forces repelled armed terrorists groups that tried to infiltrate into Syria at Halat Adlin and Al-Aramuta sites in Kalaseh and pushed the remaining terrorists back into the Lebanese territories. Authorities also discovered a 700 meters tunnel used by armed terrorist groups. The tunnel is an empty sewage that starts from Jurat al-Shayyah neighborhood and ends at al-Ghouta. Going through Nizar Qabbani roundabout, authorities found equipment used by the terrorists to move in the city and smuggle weapons. In Al-Sultaniya neighborhood, authorities attacked an armed terrorist group near Al-Birni restaurant. The dead terrorists included Muhammad al-Sabbagh, Muhammad al-Sheikh, Muhammad al-Juri, Muhammad Walid al-Sayyid, Salim Radwan and Salman Raslan. Authorities also destroyed 3 cars equipped with Dushka machine guns at Al-Hashish market. In Talbise and Al-Rastan in Homs countryside, units of the Syrian Arab Army clashed with armed terrorist groups. The terrorists killed included Mustafa Ayub Muhammad, Hamza Muhannad, Saad al-Din, Ala Firzat and Ahmed al-Haj Ali. In Al-Manama, Bahraini security forces killed a demonstrator by shooting him from a close range as it was trying to suppress and disperse a peaceful demonstration in Sadat village close to the capital Al-Manama. Thousands took to the streets demanding the Bahraini PM Khalifa bin Salman al-Khalifa, who has been in office since 1971 and strongly opposes any reform, to resign. The opposing Bahraini Al-Wifaq Society said that the security forces killed Ali Hussein Ni'ma, aged 17, after targeting him directly and deliberately from a close range. Other 2 citizens were wounded by Al-Khalifa forces in a demonstration in Al-Manama calling for political reforms. Sources of the opposition pointed out that Al-Khalifa forces used tear gas and sound bombs to disperse the demonstrators. It is to be noted that Bahrain has been witnessing a revolution that calls for political, social, economic reforms, as the Bahraini authorities has been trying to quell it by all means with the help of the Saudi Al Jazeera Shield forces. With this, we come to the end of our news for today. For more information and news, visit our website in English, www.syriaonline.sy. But for now, stay with us. After the break, Khalid Saqabani has the latest in economy.